This is a fictional, speculative narrative script inspired by public interest in the royal family. It is written for storytelling and commentary purposes only and should not be taken as factual reporting about any real person. The world noticed it slowly, almost reluctantly at first. One missed appearance, then another. A school event with only two familiar small figures. A balcony moment where one hand waved a little less, and then not at all. And then a question no one inside the palace wanted to answer became impossible to ignore. Prince Louis was no longer there. No light-hearted school glimpses shared with the public. No exuberant waves from the palace balcony. No flashes of that mischievous, infectious energy the world had grown used to watching in clips that went viral within minutes. The youngest, most unpredictable face of the modern monarchy seemed to fade, not in scandal, not in drama, but in silence. And then, only recently, the palace finally acknowledged it. Their words were brief, clinical, carefully measured. They confirmed what everyone already knew, that Louis was stepping back from public view, but they explained almost nothing, because behind that short statement lies a much longer story. A story of silence, of protective choices, and of a family trying to navigate something far more complex than any headline can ever hold. Tonight, we're not dealing in rumors. We're looking at patterns, moments that were visible to everyone, yet understood by almost no one at the time. And once you start to see them, you cannot unsee them. Before we go deeper, if you follow royal developments and prefer thoughtful, respectful coverage over sensational speculation, consider subscribing. It helps you stay informed, and it allows this channel to keep providing context where headlines so often fall short. For weeks, those who pay close attention to the rhythm of royal life sensed something was off. At first, it seemed ordinary, almost comforting in its familiarity. Children go quiet in the public eye all the time. Sometimes it's for school, sometimes for holidays, sometimes because parents want normal days without lenses, microphones, or commentary. A quieter phase, a desire for normality, a family protecting privacy. That explanation worked for a while. But as key moments in the royal calendar passed, one detail kept repeating itself with unnerving consistency. Prince George appeared taller, more assured, mirroring his father's stance. Princess Charlotte appeared, composed, steady, looking older than the last time the cameras found her. Yet the space where Prince Louis usually stood, the gap where his restless energy once spilled over, even when told to stand still, remained unmistakably, stubbornly empty. No explanation. No passing reference. Not a single still image released quietly to reassure. The silence stopped feeling accidental, it started to feel intentional. 3 major royal events turned quiet curiosity into genuine concern. The Commonwealth Day service, Trooping the Colour, Remembrance Sunday. Each time the Wales family presented a united front, polished, coordinated, and as symbolic as ever, and yet each time they were incomplete. To a casual observer, it might have seemed like a scheduling detail, a child studying, a family choice. But to those who understand how monarchy works, how it speaks, how it signals, this absence was not subtle. The monarchy communicates as powerfully through who appears as it does through what is said. Presence is a statement. So is absence. And this absence was beginning to speak volumes. Was it a simple parental decision? A temporary adjustment to allow one child more privacy? Or was a quieter, heavier decision taking shape behind closed doors, one that no one was prepared to explain? What unsettled many was not that Louis was missing once. It was that he was missing every time. Then, after weeks of mounting speculation, the palace spoke. Their statement was brief, measured, impersonal. It referenced the child's well-being. It mentioned a period of time away from public duties and engagements. No drama, no detail, no emotion. To most people it sounded reassuring, calm, controlled. A standard, polished response. But to those fluent in royal language, it raised more questions than it answered. Because when the palace chooses to say very little, it is rarely because there is nothing to say. It is because timing matters. Control matters. Narrative matters. This was not an announcement of a return. It was not framed as a brief pause or a short break before normal service resumed. It was something else, an acknowledgement of a shift. And that distinction matters. History shows that when royal children step back from public life, the reasons are almost never simple. And the journey back, if it happens, is almost never straightforward. Which brings us to something many overlooked when it first happened. The last balcony appearance. At first glance, that day looked like so many others. The sun fell just right across the stone. The crowd surged forward as the royal standard waved. Smiles were practiced, waves were familiar, composure was expected. On the surface, it was a perfect repetition of a well-rehearsed scene. But watching that footage now, with the benefit of hindsight, something feels unmistakably different. Prince Louis, usually animated, impulsive, and gloriously unpredictable, seemed muted. His posture was more rigid than usual. His movements were smaller, tightly contained. His expression, instead of open delight or comic distraction, carried a distant, inward quality. This wasn't misbehavior. It wasn't one of his famously cheeky moments. It wasn't playfulness at all. It was restraint. Later, those who study body language and childhood behavior pointed out subtle signs of emotional overwhelm. Nothing extraordinary for a child in such a high-stimulus environment: noise, crowds, cameras, expectations. But notable because it contrasted sharply with how Louis usually responded to such moments. And then there was Catherine. Elegant, composed, every gesture where it needed to be. On the surface, the perfect consort, the steady presence at the heart of a spectacle. But there was one fleeting moment, a fraction of a second, when her gaze shifted. Not toward the cheering crowd, not toward the flypast, but toward her youngest child. It wasn't a proud smile. It wasn't a public display meant for the cameras. It was a question in a look. Soft, sharp, searching. The kind of look only a parent gives, not to say smile for them, but to silently ask, "Are you all right?" It was gone in less than a heartbeat. But for those who caught it, it said everything. Even more subtle was Prince William. Calm, dutiful, standing where tradition placed him. Yet at one point he seemed to glance, not out but down, scanning the movement at the edge of the balcony. A slight tilt of the head. A quick signal toward a nearby aide. A small nod in response. At the time, it blended into the choreography of the day, invisible. In hindsight, it looks like coordination. Photographers later revealed something few outside their circles knew. Restrictions had been quietly placed on images of Prince Louis that day. No tight close-ups. No isolated frames focusing solely on him. No lingering, searching shots. That instruction did not arise from nowhere. It came from concern. And that concern now appears to have shaped everything that followed. Because when the palace finally chose to speak publicly, they were not announcing a new problem. They were confirming a decision that had already been made. Decisions like that don't appear overnight. They build slowly, quietly, through small moments that add up until there is no other option. What led to that choice? Who fought for it? And why did things reach a breaking point when they did? That is where this story truly begins. And it does not end here. For weeks, the world had sensed that something deeply unusual was unfolding. A familiar child's face was suddenly nowhere to be seen. No candid school day photographs. No casual car drop-offs. No balcony waves or playful antics that once stole every camera's attention and became the heart of viral clips and affectionate commentary. Prince Louis, the youngest, most unpredictable spark of the royal family, quietly vanished from public life. No formal announcement. No gentle explanation. No reassuring message to say, "He's fine, he's just growing." At first, people assumed it was nothing more than that, a child resting from the public gaze, a family asserting its right to a private life. But as days slipped into weeks, and weeks slid into months, the silence grew louder than any headline. And then the palace finally spoke. But what they said only deepened the mystery. Because behind that carefully crafted statement lies a story the public was never intended to piece together. A story of growing concern, of private battles behind closed doors, and of a single decision that quietly reshaped the royal landscape. Before we go further, if you want thoughtful, measured updates as this story, fictional as it is here, continues to unfold, take a moment to subscribe. It ensures you won't miss future chapters as we follow the long shadow this decision casts over the monarchy. Those who follow the royal family closely are trained, over time, to notice patterns. And this particular pattern was impossible to ignore. Engagement after engagement went by. The Wales family arrived, well-dressed, aligned, measured. Yet each time they were missing someone. Prince George stood next to his father, mirroring him more with every passing year. Princess Charlotte, poised and observant, seemed almost startlingly composed for her age. But the space where Louis's restless energy once filled the air remained persistently, deliberately empty. No mention of him in speeches or programs. No photographs tucked into official releases. Not even a small caju. Acknowledgement like Louis is at home today. Commonwealth Day. Trooping the Colour. Remembrance Sunday. 3 highly symbolic appearances. 3 consecutive absences. And through all of it, the palace said nothing more than was absolutely necessary. For an institution that depends on visibility, on the steady reassurance of continuity, such silence rarely happens by accident. Was this about privacy? About protection? Or was something else, something heavier and more personal, quietly unfolding behind palace walls? Looking back now, many royal watchers have come to believe that last balcony appearance carried a weight almost no one fully appreciated at the time. On the surface, it was a celebration. Flags, cheers, military precision. Smiles arranged neatly along a line of stone and history. But one small figure stood differently. Prince Louis, once the animated heart of those scenes, appeared unusually still. His hands did not wander from the railing as much. His head didn't bob with curiosity toward the aircraft overhead. His usual impulse to lean, to point, to whisper, to ask seemed dimmed. Moments once brushed off as a child's mood swing, he's tired, he's overwhelmed, he's just being 4, 5, 6, began to look in retrospect like something more. Observers later pointed to subtle signs of discomfort. Not rebellion, not mischief, not defiance, but quiet unease. And there, just to his side, was Catherine. In one small, easily missed instant, her focus drifted away from the expectations of the balcony and settled squarely on her son. Her expression shifted. The glint of duty softened into protective instinct. She wasn't performing in that moment. She was parenting. Behind the scenes, according to those who claimed to know the rhythms of that household, Catherine became increasingly protective. Not defiant, not dramatic, protective. She was not trying to make a statement against the monarchy. She was not mounting some grand campaign. She was doing something far more basic and far more powerful. She was prioritizing her child. Sources, if they are to be believed in this imagined version of events, describe Catherine quietly but firmly pushing for change. Fewer overwhelming appearances. Gentler morning routines on big days. Less time in front of shouting crowds and endless shutters. A slower pace. More room for Louis simply to be Louis. Private conversations began to replace cheerful public smiles. Where calendars once dictated everything, concerns began to redraw the lines. Insiders suggest that Catherine consistently requested space, not secrecy, not exile, just space. Time away. Time to breathe. Time to let one child grow without the constant weight of the nation's gaze. But tradition is slow, sometimes painfully slow to bend. Advisors worried about press reaction, about speculation, about what unexplained absences might stir up in a culture addicted to constant updates and immediate answers. Absence can be louder than presence, and that made them nervous. Yet Catherine's position, we are told, did not soften. Because in her mind, this was no longer about how things looked. It was about what they cost. And she was no longer willing to pay that cost with her child's comfort. She was not alone. Prince William, raised in a system where duty is non-negotiable, where the crown is a destiny rather than a choice, reached his own quiet turning point. He had always understood pressure. He had grown up beneath it. He knew what it meant to smile through grief, to perform through confusion, to be watched even as a child. But this time was different. This pressure was not settling on his shoulders. It was being passed down to smaller ones. Insiders in this narrative describe private meetings that grew tense, emotional even. William began asking different questions. Not how does this look, but what does this do? Not what message do we send, but what are we asking of him? For the first time, according to those accounts, William stopped seeing the crown solely as inheritance and began seeing it as a weight. A weight that, when placed too heavily on a child, can leave marks that never fully fade. At Catherine's urging, and with William's eventual agreement, specialists were consulted quietly. No announcements, no labels, no terms for the public to dissect and misinterpret. Just professional advice sought in private. The guidance they reportedly received did not point toward scandal. It did not justify panic. It pointed simply and directly toward sensitivity. They were told that some children feel public environments more intensely than others. The roar of the crowd becomes a wall of sound. The cameras feel invasive, not exciting. The fixed expectations, stand here, wave now, smile then, can tighten around a child like invisible rope. The recommendation that followed was clear and responsible. Reduce exposure. Extend privacy. Slow the pace. Nothing alarming. Nothing permanent. No dramatic withdrawal from the old. Simply a recognition that this particular child might need more care and fewer cameras. But advice in the royal sphere doesn't exist in a vacuum. Here is where the tension reached its highest point. Instead of acting immediately, the discussions widened. PR teams were consulted. Risk was assessed. Headlines were anticipated. Scenarios were modeled and measured. Time passed. For Catherine, each delay, each we must consider, each we have to manage the optics, reportedly felt unbearable. Alone with the recommendation, with her instincts already screaming the same thing, she reached her own breaking point. Those close to the situation later spoke of a night when she finally broke down, not out of fear that something was dangerously wrong with her child, but out of sheer frustration. To her, the choice seemed painfully simple. Protect the child, or protect the image. And she had already chosen. What followed was a decision that would quietly reshape royal appearances. There was no public drama, no dramatic statement, no televised announcement or solemn address. There was simply this. Prince Louis stopped appearing. The change was abrupt on the outside, but gradual on the inside. Engagements that once had his name penciled in were suddenly reconsidered. Schedules were rewritten. Plans shifted from the 3 children to the older 2. It felt outwardly like a disappearance without explanation, without closure. But for those inside, it was not an ending. It was a beginning, a new chapter for the family, a test for the institution, a quiet, unpublicized line in the sand. Because while the public saw absence, something far more significant was unfolding behind palace doors. That night, the one when everything came to a head, changed more than the week ahead. Within hours, all of Catherine's planned engagements for the following days were quietly cancelled. No public reason given. No rescheduling dates announced. Behind closed doors, Catherine withdrew in a way she never had before. For the first time since she married into the royal family, she went completely offline from royal operations. No briefings. No behind-the-scenes calls to guide coverage. No quiet background conversations with trusted aides to steady the narrative. Inside the palace, concern shifted from professional to personal. Medical advisors, already consulted around Louis, reportedly urged urgency, not panic but action. They warned that delay, indecision, and half measures would do more harm than transparent, decisive steps. This was no longer about how the story would play in tomorrow's papers. It was about responsibility. William now had a clarity he could no longer set aside. What had been uncertain, maternal instinct, uneasy hints, awkward balcony moments, had been transformed into calm, professional guidance. Something needs to change, and it needs to change now. And just as the family began to act, something else happened, something they had not planned for. Information began to leak. Not documents, not medical reports, just fragments, whispers, a stray line in a gossip column, a vague suggestion that private challenges were behind Louis's absence, hints that his routine had been adjusted and that he needed time away from the spotlight. At first, it was easy to dismiss, more tabloid noise in a sea of speculation. But the timing was too precise to ignore. Each new rumor seemed to appear shortly after a private internal discussion. After a meeting, after a decision, conversations that were supposed to be sealed suddenly had shadows in print. Inside royal circles, trust started to thin. Not because anyone sought attention, but because silence in an era of relentless curiosity creates a vacuum. And vacuums invite intrusion. No source was ever identified. No one was named. But one fact became undeniable. Control had slipped. And for an institution built on control, of image, of message, of history, that loss was deeply unsettling. In response, the palace drew tighter. Meetings moved off-site. Written briefings were shortened and limited to a smaller circle. Information was shared on a strictly need-to-know basis. William and Catherine, once deeply intertwined with palace machinery, began operating more independently. Their decisions, we are told in this narrative, became more private, more tightly held, more insulated from institutional instinct. This wasn't rebellion. It was protection. Amid all of this, one quiet voice gained unexpected importance. Not publicly, privately. A long-term caregiver who had spent significant time with Prince Louis during his early years. No interviews, no paid exclusives, no dramatic revelation, just patient observations shared within the family. She did not speak of scandal. She did not speak in diagnostic terms. She spoke of a little boy, of a child who sometimes shrank back from loud applause, who found constant repetition and rigid routines draining rather than reassuring, who brightened in at corners away from formality, who was not fragile, not broken, but sensitive in ways the public eye is rarely kind to. Nothing sensational, nothing that would satisfy a headline, just humanity often lost in the noise of public life. Then came the official confirmation. Not a grand announcement, a clarification. 6 carefully worded lines sent to major newsrooms just after sunrise. They spoke of a temporary adjustment to Prince Louis's public appearances. They referenced his emotional development. They placed the emphasis squarely on his well-being. No causes, no labels, no timelines, no promises. In the language of monarchy, that restraint was deliberate. One phrase stood out more than any other. Emotional well-being. It appeared not as a dramatic diagnosis, but as a boundary. It said enough to validate what people had noticed, but not enough to open the door to intrusion. Reaction was immediate and divided. Some applauded the move. They called it compassionate, modern, overdue. Proof that even within an institution as old as the monarchy, a child's emotional needs could finally outweigh centuries of expectation. Others were less charitable. They demanded clarity. They questioned why a public family could withdraw one of its members from view without fuller explanation. Online, speculation surged. Theories spiraled. Every old clip of Louis, every fidget, every face pulled on a balcony was re-examined, reinterpreted, given new, often unfair meaning. Through it all, William and Catherine said nothing. No sit-down interviews. No softly lit documentary. No, let us explain. For a couple once characterized by a degree of accessible openness, that silence felt deliberate. Perhaps final. Prince Louis's future in that moment seemed undefined. No talk of when he would return to public engagements. No mention of future roles, duties, titles in practice. No expectation publicly set. Just space. The palace described it as a pause. But history shows that pauses within the monarchy often signal something more fundamental. A shift. Because this story, beneath all its moving parts, is not just about one child's absence. It is about boundaries. About how far tradition can reasonably reach into a child's life. About where duty ends and protection must begin. About what it truly means, to raise a child within a system built on constant, unrelenting visibility. And it is about what happens when a family finally decides that the cost is too high. In the next part of this unfolding narrative, we ask what this choice means not only for Prince Louis, but for the future shape of the royal family itself, and why some insiders believe this moment may quietly redefine the monarchy for an entire generation. Queen Elizabeth II's interest in reflection, philosophical, spiritual, and historical, was never a secret to those closest to her. She valued time alone with her thoughts. She read widely. She asked questions not just about politics and policy, but about meaning, symbolism, and the strange emotional toll of carrying a crown. Biographers have written that, on occasion, she invited trusted advisors to speak less about strategy and more about perspective. They would sit and explore tradition, symbolism, and the emotional weight of an unelected life lived in full view. Not predictions, not plans, perspective. Among the private notes and recollections that emerged years later, one memory stands out, a recollection from a retired lady-in-waiting, recorded long after the moment had passed. She described a quiet conversation between the late Queen and Catherine during Catherine's early years as a royal. It was not a warning. It was not framed as a prophecy. It was an observation. Elizabeth reportedly said that royal duty does not fall evenly across a family. That visibility always carries a price. And that sometimes the child least prepared for that visibility is the one most affected by it. At the time, it sounded like abstract wisdom, another thoughtful, slightly somber reflection from a woman who had seen too much history to be naive about it. Only in hindsight does it feel heavier. Why were these kinds of reflections never shared publicly? Why weren't they brought forward when questions began to swirl around Louis? Perhaps because they were never meant to explain events, only to acknowledge patterns. Patterns the monarchy has watched repeat in different forms for centuries. The youngest, the overlooked, the one just outside the direct line of succession, expected to adapt without complaint, to perform without question, to shoulder attention without preparation. History doesn't predict the future, but it does echo. And that is where the real mystery lies. Not in mysticism, not in fate, in choice. Was Prince Louis's disappearance from public life, in this imagined account, the result of crisis management? A strategic move to lower the temperature and calm a restless press? Was it a compassionate decision made by two parents who refused, quietly but firmly, to repeat the mistakes of the past, to sacrifice another child to the harshness of the spotlight? Or was it something even deeper? A quiet acknowledgement from within the palace walls that some traditions now demand too high a price, especially when that price is paid by a child. Because the crown does not rest only on the heads that wear it. It presses, in ways often invisible, on those who stand beside it. On those who never asked for it. On those never truly meant to carry it, yet expected to shape themselves around its presence. And as this fictional monarchy moves forward, in silence, in carefully chosen words, in deliberate absence, one truth remains impossible to ignore. Even in the most public of families, there are stories we are not entitled to own. And sometimes the bravest act a royal can make is not to appear, but to step back, so that beyond the cameras a child can simply grow.